And happy Read Your World celebrates Multicultural Children's Book Day. This is a really big day around here, the culmination of a lot of hard work, and so exciting to see everybody participating. We are celebrating today by having a wonderful interview with Federico Erebia, who I think is just getting on here. Award-winning, star-reviewed book, Pedro and Daniel. And if you haven't registered for our virtual party tonight, you still have time to do so. It's at 9 o'clock Eastern, so be sure to do that. You can follow the hashtag Read Your World to see all of the book reviews and that have been posted already. It's a really big day, so be sure to do that. And like I said, to register for our virtual party, which is happening this evening. Lots of prizes are going to be given away. We have a really great discussion. Last year was just probably our biggest and best year ever, and it looks like it's going to be even bigger than that. We have more than 200 people registered to attend, so it's going to be really exciting. And I think we lost him, but hopefully he will be getting back on soon. Hold on just a minute. There we are. Like I said, we're going to be talking today to Federico Erebia. If you haven't read Pedro and Daniel, I really recommend it. It's a really beautiful book. Hello.
Hello. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Well, why don't we go ahead and jump in, and maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us what was your journey to becoming an author?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Federico Erebia, Federico Erebia. So my journey is a little unusual. I retired from my HIV and primary care practice about 10 years ago. I had been slowly transitioning to woodworking and other creative endeavors. And then when the pandemic hit, I didn't want to go into people's houses. They didn't want me to go into their houses. So it was my third act, which is writing. So it is in an unusual way to start writing kind of at age 60 or maybe 59. Yeah, so that's how I started writing things on paper. I've been writing in my head all of my life. I'm neurodivergent, autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, so I have a variety of what I call superpowers, some people call challenges. And so, you know, I kind of live in my head a lot. And yeah, so I've been writing in my head for quite some time.
Yeah, you said that you actually had the idea for this book a few decades ago, that when your brother passed away, that was kind of planted the seeds for this book. So what made you, I mean, I know you talked about the pandemic, but had you always thought about turning it into a book and just now was the time, or what made you decide to finally go ahead and put it on paper?
Yeah, so I've been obsessing about it for over 30 years since my brother died. He and I actually did have the conversation that's in the book where I told him that I wanted to write our story. So I've been obsessively kind of compartmentalizing the different stories in my head and thinking about how I would do it. But when I actually sat down to write it, I have no writing background. I don't have any, you know, an MFA or anything like that. So I decided to go an easier route and easier in some ways, and start writing picture book manuscripts so that I could write a short story at a time. And that's how it all started. When I sent the manuscript of a picture book to the person who would become my editor, he loved it right away and asked me to send him all the rest of my stories, and then asked me to combine them into a novel, which is how it became a novel.
Oh, that's interesting, because I was going to ask about that, because a lot of people have commented on the form of the book.
Right.
That it has, you know, the beginning, it's third person narration, but you kind of get the sense it's coming from a lot of different narrators. And then as the brothers get older, that it alternates between their voices. So is that because originally they were all separate stories, or how did you kind of come up with that form?
You know, if you think about it, the part one of the book follows the boys over 16 months. So monthly for 16 months. And Daniel is 5 and Pedro is I guess 6. when they start out. And so from their perspectives, they don't have the vocabulary or the grammar to explain to the reader what they need to know about these two boys. So I needed it to be third person, so that the reader could understand, you know, the various social and societal issues that they were dealing with on a daily basis already at starting age 5 and 6. They're already living those nightmares, really. And so that was kind of my plan all along, to kind of explain, you know, those months and those early years in third person, and then to eventually change the voice so that the brothers are telling their own stories. And so in part one, I did want to make sure that there was dialogue so that you could hear the voices, which is significantly different from the narrator's voice, clear. And I wanted also, like I said, or like you said, each of those chapters is told from a slightly different third person narrator. And so I suggest at the very beginning of the book for people to imagine that it's the various adults in the brothers' lives who knew what was going on but decided not to, you know, intervene in any way. So it could be the doctor, it could be the priests, it could be the police, the social workers, the neighbors who all heard the commotions and the violence and all that, and certainly knew that it was an unhealthy living situation.
Right. And for those that don't know, maybe we should talk a little bit about Pedro and Daniel. They're gay, neurodivergent.
For children to see themselves in books. And it's also important for children to see others in books. And so, you know, the various programs like We Need Diverse Books and similar programs are putting a face to the need. But even now, you know, probably a decade, I think, after We Need Diverse Books, we still have a very small portion of books being created by and or about marginalized or underrepresented communities. And then if you think about intersectional characters, they're even more rare. And then if you add to that the intersectionalities of their backgrounds, you know, either homelessness or hunger or violence or abuse, those are even more rare in a children's book. So putting them all together, you know, I wasn't trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink in. I was pretty much telling the story of myself and my brother as children. And I'd never seen those types of stories in a book. When I was trying to get comp titles for Pedro and Daniel, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find a single book where the biological mother was the abusive person, adult. I don't know of another children's book like that. And, you know, it's a challenge out there for those listening. If you know of any books, I'd be very interested to hear about them, because I am trying to compile some books as reading lists for people, especially for teachers who teach literature. I think it's important to kind of have a reading list.
Right. Yeah, I can think of another one that it is the mother who is the abuser, and have to say the way that it is written, I wouldn't say that the reader necessarily feels sympathy for the mother, and yet there is some kind of like a little bit of a not explanation where you're trying to kind of understand her mindset, which, as you say, as the children, they wouldn't have, if they were narrating that part, they wouldn't have really been able to do. Yeah, and I wanted to go to, I mean, you're talking about, it's about abuse, it's about homophobia, colorism, and I love that you included at the front of the book the trigger warning and resources for readers. But it's also a book about hope, about resilience, and of course about this love between the brothers. What do you hope that the readers take away from your book?
That's another good and very tough question. I have been asked that before, and you know, what I would like for readers to take away is that, you know, among other things, things can get better for people who are in difficult situations, for readers, younger readers who are in a situation, or even some adults who are in bad situations. There is hope. There's always hope. There's always help out there for people. Sometimes it's hard to ask for help, depending on, you're just young, or you don't know how to, or you're afraid, or you don't have the resources. So, part of it is the hope, but I also want people to see the incredible amount of joy and laughter that the brothers experience despite everything else. There are so many stories that, when I read my book over and over, and I listen to the audiobook, which I have to plug. Frankie Corso narrates the audiobook, and she is fantastic. And if you have a chance, I would highly recommend listening to the audiobook. She's phenomenal. She does all of the characters and the secondary characters so well. And now I forgot what I was saying, because I tend to do that. Get on tangent.
You were talking about how you read the book over again, what you want people to take away from.
Yeah, so the joy, there were some chapters where I still laugh when I read it or listen to it, because Daniel was such a funny kid. And I didn't have any of that as a kid. I do have a dyslexia and I have a stutter, so it does affect my speech. So I tended to be very quiet as a kid in particular. He was witty and sarcastic, and could really just come up with these one-liners that would just have us all laughing uncontrollably. And so it took me a while to really get into his head and really kind of tell his story from his perspective, and to have his humor, which, I had to work a different type of brain muscle for that. I think I was successful in kind of bringing his humor to the page.
Definitely. I mean, it's strange you wouldn't call it a fun book to read, but like you said, there are some really funny moments, and there is that joy in it. And also, I like that how, we were talking about all these identities and intersectionalities that the boys share, and yet the brothers are so different in a lot of ways, even though they have so much in common. They're going through a very common situation, and yet even when in the very early chapters, when they were quite young, the way they deal with things and their attitude is just very different, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. It's like the saying, the dicho stories. I was like, oh, let me throw some of these dichos in. And so, the beginning of each chapter, I just kind of utilized the poems that I wrote in English using the Spanish dichos. And then the more I looked at them, the more I thought I should be using them in the story, because they're such an important component of a child's, I don't know if every child hears proverbs or dichos as kids, but I loved them as a kid. Parables and fables and those types of things were just really important in how I learned, kind of right from wrong, and other kind of, pearls of wisdom.
Right.
And it just, once I started using them, I just couldn't stop. And then once I finished the book, I realized that the cumulative effect of the dichos is that they are an unnamed character in the book. They are kind of like the adult or the the guiding light for the kids from when they're little kids all the way to the end of the book. They're using dichos, they're reciting them, they're making some of them up themselves. So yeah, I just love them a lot. And so many people say that it's the favorite part of the book.
Yeah.
They just don't let go and look for when's the next one coming.
Yeah, and like you said, it kind of like is this thread throughout the book and throughout all of the chapters. And so, did you do the English translation?
Yes.
And some of them at the beginning, especially at the beginning, they were actually English sayings that I had heard, and some of them I hadn't. So there are these little poems, and so you composed those yourself?
I composed the poems, yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love that. And for those, if you haven't read it, it actually opens up with one of them, which is recordar es volver a vivir, to remember is to live again. So why did you choose to open up with that as your epigraph for the whole book?
I love that line. So at the end of the book, I believe I've brought Daniel back to life within the pages of the book, 30 years later. And so it reminded me of this dicho where, in fact, just remembering someone can bring them back to life. And I wish as a child that we celebrated Dia de los Muertos in our home. I don't understand why we didn't. For whatever reason, it wasn't part of either my mother or my father. But once I became older, and especially Frida Kahlo's kind of her paintings and other kind of movies and things, I started researching more about Dia de los Muertos, and it's like, gosh, I wish we had done that. Although honestly, we didn't have a lot of death when we were kids, so we wouldn't necessarily know about or want to do ofrendas for people that we knew as kids that died. But certainly our parents would have done it if they had celebrated as kids.
And this was such a personal project. I mean, like you said, bringing your brother back to life in these pages, did that make it easier to write the book, or did it make it more difficult to create that final product?
So I would say both. I certainly knew the overall outline of the story, but I had to really kind of choose very particular stories throughout their lives. And I revised the manuscript hundreds of times. I can't even tell you. It was over about a year and a half where I was writing this one manuscript, and there was enough on the cutting room floor for me to write at least another book or two, because of the amount of information that you could possibly put in a book. So really selecting the stories that ended up in the book was difficult. It was hard to see some stories on the cutting room floor, definitely.
Do you think that you ever will write another book, either about Pedro and Daniel or something else, or maybe go back to the idea of picture books?
But so actually both. So I am writing a sequel to Daniel. It's called Pedro Without Daniel. So it picks up Pedro's life years later, but there are ways that I bring Daniel back in the book. Is his character, his voice, and all that. So it's not completely Pedro without Daniel. It's just Daniel is not living. And so, some flashbacks and other ways that I've creatively used to bring him back. And then I am writing picture books. There's an editor that reached out to me and asked me to expand on one of the stories that I put in. And so I'm working on a picture book manuscript and dummy for that. So.
Oh, comment. Wow, so excited for the sequel. Me too. I didn't realize there was going to be one, so I'm very excited.
I love
the book. Do you have an idea of when we can expect those, or is it still in the early stages?
They're early-ish stages. Picture book, I've been in contact with this editor, and she and I will be meeting again in a few weeks. And I have so many works in progress right now that it'll be an adult manuscript with Pedro. And so that is, I go back to it periodically and add to it and revise it. But I've got 4 picture book dummies, 2 graphic novels, a poetry collection, some short stories, and some essays that I'm writing. So a few things going on at the same time. And then I've been asked to be part of a poetry anthology that's coming out next year.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I can't wait to see all of that. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. And we will keep an eye on, of course, when they are available, we'll share that in our stories. And for everybody watching, if you joined us late, this will be up in just a few minutes on Instagram and later on our YouTube channel. If you haven't registered for our virtual party tonight, please go ahead and do so. There's still time to do it. And thank you again for joining us. It was such a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.